Hello again. You're watching Today on eNCA TSTV channel 43. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin was on a charm offensive at the second Russia-Africa summit that took place earlier in St. Petersburg. Now, Russia has been seeking to strengthen its ties with African countries. About 17 heads of African states attended the gathering this year, with Putin promising free grain to its allies. Managing Director of Reputation First Group, Tshepo Matseba, was part of the delegation that attended the summit. Let's chat to him now about this meeting and what really came from it. What's the significance of this? Did Africa gain anything out of this Russia-Africa summit, the second one? Good afternoon, Tshepo. Welcome to Today.
Good afternoon, Braden, and thank you for inviting us.
Was it worthwhile, the summit?
Of course, I think that a couple of dimensions, and it depends from which lens you are looking at. If you look at it from the lens of representing Africa around the globe and the image of the continent around the globe, I think it was a significant showcase because no less than 27 African countries and leaders participated actively in the plenaries and different plenaries of the event. But also what was more fascinating was the sheer number of African countries that showcase their products, their services, and positioning their countries as investment destinations. It was sad, though, not to see South Africa, at least as a tourism brand, South Africa, or probably South African promoting their brands in those tents, because the event itself, from an organization point of view, was a sophisticated showcase of how Russia can deliver from an economic perspective in terms of collaboration. So what we saw was really a demonstration of an intention to actually influence global politics, influence global economics in a serious manner. Zimbabwe, for me, was a highlight. I had a discussion with the Minister of Energy in Zimbabwe, and I observed him actually signing an agreement on the energy development in that country, demonstrating and actually highlighting that Zimbabwe relies a lot on South Africa, and given that South Africa is currently under pressure, he was very keen to see this energy deal, which includes some components of nuclear or energy mix that would put Zimbabwe on the map.
Now, Tshepo, at a broader level, I understand there were about 17 heads of state or government leaders, but you said there were 27 countries in total that participated. The fact that this summit was taking place, or it took place in an environment where there's conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and the Western world has imposed sanctions against Russia, and Africa has got like more than 50 countries, and the others didn't take part. How should we interpret this? Did this in any way come up as to impact the summit itself? Because one would have expected much more or many more countries rather than the 27 you've mentioned.
Yeah, look, I mean, the fact that not all African countries were present, or in the majority of the African Union's 54 member states, it probably sends a signal that some of the African countries did not want to be associated, or may not want to be associated with Russia at this particular point in time, given the aggressive level of war that we're seeing in Ukraine. But importantly, when you look at what was happening in the room and the kind of conversations that were taking place around collaboration, around economic development, around education, you could tell that the African countries that were there are also sending a similar message, that the exclusion of Africa and the hegemony of the West in global politics, they've had enough with it. And the message was very clear that it's about the future, it's about collaboration, and it's about bringing Africa into the table. And if Russia could present that opportunity together with other members of the BRICS community, in the end, you would find that African leaders are actually embracing of the opportunity, and they're beginning to step up. It was also fascinating to see leaders of the continent speaking against the war openly.
Yeah, and what about Russia? did you get a sense that they understand that Africans now want to be treated equally and be left alone to make their own sovereign decisions about whoever they trade with, for example, whoever they invite to invest in their countries, whoever they want to have bilateral relations with? Did you get a sense that Moscow understands this?
So the sovereignty of African states is what was actually emphasized, including by President Putin himself. But the promises that he made may well send other different signals as to whether these are pledges or these are actually the promises that will be fulfilled to the countries that he mentioned. But, you know, Braden, on an overall level, holistically, when you look at what was transpiring in those discussions, you get a sense that we were talking as equal partners. You get a sense that Africans were being taken seriously in those boardrooms, in those plenary sessions. And the Russians, you know, the delegations from business, from civil society, and from government were taking the discussions very, very seriously. They were taking notes.
Yeah, and the whole issue of BRICS summit is going to be happening this month without Putin being present. And I wonder how that came up. What was the key takeaway around that issue? Because whether we like it or not here in South Africa, it has pretty much occupied most of our headlines in the last few months.
Yeah, I mean, in Russia, that is from a media point of view, we've observed their media conversations for the last week at least, and we've observed that it's a non-issue. It has been a discussion amongst about 451 journalists from the African continent who were there asking questions around what would happen at the specific BRICS summit. But an indication from the Russians was very clear that President Putin would actually participate virtually, and that he had an understanding, a very clear understanding that this BRICS summit is as important as the previous ones that he partook in.
Tshepo Matseba, thank you very much for your time and your reflections about this second Russia-Africa summit that took place in St. Petersburg. He was just giving us some of his views about what happened there.